The crystal chandeliers sparkled like diamonds above the crowded ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Rich people in expensive suits and glittering dresses moved around with wine glasses in their hands, talking and laughing loudly. The air smelled of fancy perfume and fresh flowers that cost more than most people made in a month. Richard Blackwood stood near the bar, checking his gold watch for the third time. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to judge everything they looked at. His black suit probably cost more than a car, and he wore it like armor. Richard had built his technology company from nothing and was now worth billions. But money hadn't made him kind. Another boring charity event, he thought to himself, taking a sip of expensive whiskey. He only came to these things because his business friends expected it. Being seen at charity events was good for his image, even though he didn't really care about helping anyone. Around him, other wealthy people talked about their vacation homes and new cars. They dropped the names of famous people they knew and bragged about their latest business deals. Richard joined in these conversations easily, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about a big meeting he had the next morning that could make him even richer. The event was supposed to raise money for homeless and orphaned children. There were pictures on display showing kids in shelters, eating meals at soup kitchens and sleeping in crowded rooms. Most of the guests barely looked at these photos. They were too busy networking and being seen by the right people. A woman in a sparkly red dress approached Richard with a bright smile. "Mr. Blackwood, how wonderful to see you here. Your company's donation will help so many children." She was one of the event organizers, and her job was to make the rich donors feel good about themselves. Richard nodded politely but didn't really listen to her speech about helping kids. He had written a check because his accountant said it would be good for taxes. The actual children meant nothing to him. In his mind, poor people were poor because they didn't work hard enough. He had no patience for sob stories or excuses. The ballroom was decorated with expensive flowers and golden ribbons. Tables were set with fine china and silver that caught the light. Everything looked perfect and beautiful, but it felt cold and fake. The charity had spent a fortune making this event look impressive, probably more than they would actually give to the children. As Richard looked around the room, he noticed other business leaders he knew. They were all here for the same reason he was, to be seen doing good, not because they actually wanted to help. They would write their checks, take some photos for their social media, and then forget about the whole thing until next year. The food was served by waiters in white gloves who moved silently between the guests. Tiny portions of expensive ingredients were arranged like art on small plates. Richard ate without tasting, his mind still on business. He was already planning his exit strategy. He would stay just long enough to be polite, then leave for a more important dinner meeting. But something was different about tonight. Usually these charity events were just for adults, but he noticed there were actually some children present. They sat quietly at a table near the back, looking uncomfortable in clothes that didn't quite fit. These must be some of the kids the charity was supposed to help. Richard felt annoyed. Why bring the actual poor children to such an elegant event? It would just make the guests uncomfortable. These kids didn't belong in a place like this with its marble floors and gold decorations. They looked out of place and awkward, like they knew they didn't belong. The charity organizers probably thought it would tug at people's heartstrings to see the children in person. But Richard found it manipulative and cheap. He preferred his charity to be abstract, numbers on a tax form, not real faces staring at him with hopeful eyes. As the evening continued, Richard became more impatient. The speeches were boring, full of the same tired phrases about making a difference and changing lives. He had heard it all before at dozens of similar events. The only thing that changed was the cause. Sometimes it was homeless children. Sometimes it was hungry families. Sometimes it was sick animals. He checked his phone and saw messages from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings. Real business was waiting for him. Deals that would actually matter and make him money. This charity nonsense was just a waste of time, a necessary evil in the world of the super rich. The other guests seemed to be enjoying themselves, or at least pretending to. They smiled and clapped at the right moments, nodded seriously during the emotional speeches, and wrote checks with practiced ease. It was all a performance, a dance they had all learned to do perfectly. Richard finished his drink and considered leaving early. He had done his duty by showing up and would write his check before leaving. That should be enough charity for 1 year. He had businesses to run and money to make. The real world was waiting for him outside this bubble of fake kindness and expensive decorations. But as he prepared to make his excuses and leave, something unexpected was about to happen that would change everything. Sometimes life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, and Richard Blackwood was about to learn that lesson in the most dramatic way possible. As Richard was getting ready to leave, he noticed something that made him stop. Near the huge grand piano at the front of the ballroom, a small figure sat alone in a chair that was too big for her. While all the adults were busy talking and laughing, this little girl sat quietly by herself, looking around with wide, curious eyes. The girl looked to be about 10 years old, maybe 11. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a dress that was clean but clearly secondhand. The dress was too long for her small frame, and her shoes looked like they had been donated from someone else's closet. Everything about her screamed that she didn't belong in this world of luxury and wealth, but what struck Richard most was how she sat so still and calm while chaos swirled around her. She wasn't fidgeting or looking bored like most kids would be. Instead, she watched the adults with an intelligence that seemed too old for her young face. Her eyes followed the conversations, the movements, the whole strange dance of rich people pretending to care about poor children. Richard found himself staring at her, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because she looked so out of place, or maybe it was because she seemed to be the only honest person in the room. While everyone else was putting on an act, she was just being herself. A kid who had somehow ended up in a place where she clearly didn't belong. The girl's name was Luna Chen, though Richard didn't know that yet. She lived at the Sunshine Children's Home, a shelter for kids who had nowhere else to go. The charity organizers had brought her and 5 other children to the event as part of their presentation. They wanted the donors to see real faces, real kids who would benefit from their money. But Luna felt like she was in a museum where she was both the visitor and the exhibit. These rich people kept looking at her and the other kids like they were interesting objects rather than real people. She could hear them whispering about how sweet and tragic the children looked. It made her feel uncomfortable, like she was a character in someone else's story. As Richard watched, he saw a woman in a bright pink dress approach the table where Luna and the other children sat. The woman had too much makeup and a voice that was too loud and too cheerful. She was one of those people who thought being loud meant being kind. "Oh, you darling children," the woman gushed, bending down to their level like she was talking to puppies. "Aren't you just precious? You know, all these wonderful people here tonight are helping to make your lives better. Isn't that exciting?" The children nodded politely, but Richard could see they felt awkward. They had probably been coached on how to behave, told to be grateful and smile no matter what. Luna managed a small smile, but her eyes showed that she saw right through the woman's fake enthusiasm. "You know what would be lovely?" the pink dress woman continued, getting more excited. "Why don't you children perform something for all these generous donors? Show them how talented and grateful you are. I bet some of you can sing or dance or do something special." Richard rolled his eyes. Of course someone would suggest this. Nothing said charity event like making poor kids perform for rich people's entertainment. It was like something out of an old movie, and not in a good way. The other children looked nervous and uncomfortable. They whispered among themselves, clearly not wanting to be put on the spot. But Luna remained calm, though Richard noticed her hands had moved to rest on her knees, her fingers making small movements like she was playing invisible keys. "Come on, don't be shy," the woman pressed on, not reading the room at all. "Surely one of you has some talent to share. What about you, sweetie?" She pointed directly at Luna. "What can you do?" Richard felt his patience snap. The whole scene was ridiculous and embarrassing. These people had no shame, turning charity into a circus where kids had to perform for their supper. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chatter around him. "Oh, please," Richard said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What could that little girl possibly do? Sing some nursery rhyme? Do a little dance? He gestured dismissively toward Luna, who looked up at him with those same calm, intelligent eyes. "I suppose next you'll tell us she can play piano like Mozart." The conversations around them began to quiet as people turned to see what was happening. Richard was known for his sharp tongue, but this seemed cruel even for him. Still, he couldn't stop himself. All the fake emotion and pretend caring had pushed him over the edge. "Tell you what," Richard continued, his voice getting louder as more people turned to listen. If that little ragamuffin can actually play piano, really play, not just bang on the keys, I'll adopt her myself." He laughed at his own joke, expecting others to join in, but the ballroom had gone completely silent. Hundreds of eyes stared at Richard, then at Luna, then back at Richard. The woman in the pink dress looked horrified. Even Richard's business associates looked uncomfortable with how far he had gone. Luna stood up slowly from her chair. She was small and thin, but there was something in the way she moved that commanded attention. She didn't look angry or hurt by Richard's words. Instead, she looked determined, like she had been waiting her whole life for exactly this moment. "I can play piano," she said quietly, but her voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Would you like me to show you?" Richard felt a moment of doubt, but it was too late to back down now. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. His reputation was on the line, and he had never backed down from anything in his life. "By all means," he said with a wave of his hand, trying to sound confident. "Show us what you've got, kid." What happened next would change both of their lives forever. The applause continued for what felt like forever, but Richard barely heard it. His mind was spinning as he tried to process what had just happened. This little girl from a children's shelter had just played one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written, and she had played it better than most professional musicians he had ever heard. As the clapping finally died down, people began whispering among themselves. Richard could hear fragments of their conversations. Words like incredible, amazing, and unbelievable floated through the air. But he could also hear other words that made his stomach turn: promise, adoption, and his word. Luna had returned to her seat at the children's table, but now everyone in the ballroom kept glancing between her and Richard. The weight of their stares felt heavier than anything he had ever experienced in his business life. He had made deals worth billions of dollars without breaking a sweat, but this moment terrified him. An older woman with kind eyes approached Luna's table. This was Mrs. Rodriguez, the director of Sunshine Children's Home where Luna lived. She had been watching from the back of the room, and now she came forward with tears streaming down her face. "Luna, my dear," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly, "that was absolutely beautiful. Your mother would be so proud." At the mention of Luna's mother, Richard felt curious despite his panic. Who was this child's mother? How had a kid in foster care learned to play like that? Mrs. Rodriguez seemed to sense the questions in the room, and she looked up at the crowd of wealthy donors. "Perhaps you should know Luna's story," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying across the quiet ballroom. Her mother was Isabella Chen, one of the most promising young pianists of her generation. She had just signed with a major record label when Luna was born. Richard felt his heart skip a beat. He knew that name. Isabella Chen had been featured in classical music magazines as a rising star before she suddenly disappeared from the music world. He had assumed she had given up performing for some typical reason, but now he was learning the truth. Isabella chose to focus on raising Luna rather than touring the world, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. She taught Luna to play from the time she could sit at a piano bench. Music was their whole life together. Isabella always said that Luna had twice the talent she did, and that one day, Luna would play in the greatest concert halls in the world. The room listened in complete silence as Mrs. Rodriguez told Luna's story. Richard found himself hanging on every word, trying to understand how this remarkable child had ended up in his path. 2 years ago, Isabella was driving Luna home from a piano lesson when a drunk driver ran a red light, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice breaking slightly. Isabella died instantly, but Luna survived with just minor injuries. She had no other family, no one to take care of her. That's how she came to live with us. Richard felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. This little girl had lost her mother, her teacher, her whole world, and yet she had just played with such joy and passion. How was that possible? How could someone so young carry such pain and still create such beauty? After the accident, Luna didn't speak for 3 months, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. She wouldn't eat much, wouldn't play with the other children. But one day I found her at an old piano we had in our recreation room. She was playing a lullaby her mother used to sing to her, and she was crying. That was when I knew the music would help heal her heart. Luna sat quietly during this story, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look embarrassed or sad. Instead, she looked peaceful, like she had made peace with her difficult past. Richard wondered how someone so young could have such strength and grace. "We don't have the money for proper piano lessons at the shelter," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "Luna has been teaching herself from her mother's old sheet music and books. Everything you heard tonight came from her own practice and dedication. She plays every day, sometimes for hours, working through pieces that would challenge college students." Richard looked at Luna with new eyes. She wasn't just a talented kid. She was a young person who had survived tragedy and turned her pain into something beautiful. The music wasn't just notes she played. It was her way of staying connected to her mother and processing her grief. One of the other guests, a woman who had been crying during Luna's performance, stepped forward. "How long has she been playing?" she asked. "Since she was 4 years old," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "Isabella started teaching her the basics, and Luna just absorbed everything like a sponge. By the time she was 7, she was playing pieces that most teenagers struggle with." Her mother used to joke that Luna was born with music in her DNA. Richard's business mind started working despite his emotional turmoil. This level of talent was rare, maybe once in a generation. With proper training and opportunities, Luna could become one of the greatest pianists alive. But she was stuck in a children's shelter with no resources and no connections to the music world. "What will happen to her?" another guest asked. "Does she have any chance of getting proper training?" Mrs. Rodriguez sighed deeply. "We're doing our best, but we're just a small shelter with limited funds. Luna deserves to study with the best teachers, to play on good instruments, to have the same opportunities that wealthy children take for granted. But those things cost money we don't have. I pray that someday someone will give her the chance she deserves." As Mrs. Rodriguez spoke these words, every eye in the room turned back to Richard. His careless joke had become a moment of truth that would define his character. Here was a child who had lost everything but still shared her gift with the world. Here was someone who needed exactly the kind of help his money could provide. Luna looked up at him again, and this time Richard saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't pleading or desperation. It was hope mixed with quiet dignity. She wasn't asking him for anything, but she was giving him the chance to be better than he had ever been before. The ballroom was completely silent again, waiting to see what Richard would do. His reputation, his self-respect, and maybe even his soul hung in the balance. Everything he thought he knew about worth and value had been turned upside down by a 10-year-old girl with second-hand clothes and a gift that could move mountains. This was the moment when Richard realized that all his money and success meant nothing compared to the courage and talent of this remarkable child. And he also realized that his thoughtless words had given him an opportunity that might be the most important thing he ever did in his life. The question was, would he be brave enough to take it? Richard stood in the center of the ballroom, feeling like the whole world was watching him, which in a way it was. Every person in that room had heard his cruel joke and witnessed Luna's incredible performance. Now they waited to see if he was a man of honor, or just another rich person who made promises he never intended to keep. His first instinct was to find a way out. His sharp business mind immediately started looking for loopholes. He could claim he was obviously joking. He could write a big check to the charity and hope everyone forgot about his specific words. He could even leave the event right now and let his lawyers handle any social fallout later. But as Richard looked around the room, he realized that escape wasn't really an option. These weren't just random people. They were his business partners, his social circle, his professional network. Many of them had their phones out, and he was sure videos of Luna's performance and his promise were already spreading online. In today's connected world, there was no hiding from your words. More importantly, Luna was still looking at him with those calm, intelligent eyes. She wasn't begging or pleading. She was simply waiting to see what kind of person he really was. That look was more powerful than any business pressure he had ever faced. "Well, Richard?" called out David Chen, a fellow tech billionaire who had been watching the whole scene. "Are you going to keep your word?" That was quite a performance the young lady gave us. Richard felt his face getting hot. David was known for his charitable work and had probably never made a thoughtless promise like this in his life. The question sounded friendly on the surface, but Richard could hear the challenge underneath. David was giving him a chance to do the right thing, but also making it clear that backing down would be noticed and remembered. "Yes, Richard," added another voice from the crowd. "We all heard what you said. If she could really play piano, you would adopt her." "Well, I think we can all agree that she can really play piano." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. People were trying to keep the mood light. But Richard could feel the tension building. This wasn't just about keeping a promise anymore, it was about his reputation, his character, and his standing in the community. Richard's hands started to sweat as he realized the full scope of what was happening. Adoption wasn't like buying a car or making a business deal. It meant taking responsibility for another person's entire life. It meant becoming a father to a child he had met just minutes ago. It meant changing everything about his carefully controlled, selfish existence. His mind raced through all the practical problems. He lived alone in a massive penthouse apartment that wasn't set up for children. He worked 16-hour days and traveled constantly for business. He knew nothing about raising kids, especially not a kid who had been through trauma. What did children eat? How did bedtimes work? What about school and friends and all the millions of things parents were supposed to know? But even as these practical concerns flooded his mind, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Luna's performance. The way she had played wasn't just technically perfect, it was emotionally honest and incredibly brave. She had taken his mockery and responded with something beautiful instead of anger or sadness. That took a kind of strength that Richard wasn't sure he possessed. Richard started to speak, then stopped. His usual confidence had completely abandoned him. For the first time in decades, he didn't have a plan or a strategy. He was just a man standing in a room full of people, trying to figure out how to do the right thing. Luna stood up from her chair and walked toward him again. This time she didn't go to the piano. She stopped directly in front of Richard and looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. "You don't have to adopt me if you don't want to," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I know you were just making a joke, but I wanted you to know that I really can play piano, and I practice every day because it makes me feel close to my mom. Music isn't just something I do, it's who I am." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. This child was giving him an easy way out, showing him more grace and maturity than he had shown her. She was protecting his feelings even though he had tried to embarrass her in front of hundreds of people. How was it possible for someone so young to be so wise and kind? "I don't need a family to be happy," Luna continued, though Richard could see the slight tremor in her hands that suggested this wasn't entirely true. "Mrs. Rodriguez and all the kids at the shelter are like family to me. But if you really meant what you said, I promise I would try to be a good daughter. I would practice piano every day and I would work hard in school and I wouldn't cause any trouble." The ballroom was so quiet that Richard could hear his own heartbeat. Luna's words were simple and honest, without any manipulation or demands. She was a child who had learned not to expect too much from adults, which made Richard feel even worse about his behavior. He looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who was watching with tears in her eyes. He could see the hope she was trying to hide, the way she was praying that this impossible moment might actually lead to something good for Luna. All the other children from the shelter were watching too, their young faces full of wonder at the possibility that their friend might get the kind of chance they all dreamed about. Richard thought about his own childhood, growing up poor with parents who worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. He remembered what it felt like to want things that seemed impossible, to dream about a different kind of life. He had been lucky and smart and ruthless enough to build his fortune, but he had forgotten what it felt like to need someone else's kindness. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting to see what he would choose. But more than that, Luna was waiting, and her trust was somehow more important than all the business relationships and social standing in the world. Richard realized that this wasn't just about keeping a promise or avoiding embarrassment. This was about the kind of person he wanted to be. Did he want to be someone who mocked children and broke his word? Or did he want to be someone who could rise to meet an extraordinary moment with extraordinary courage? As he looked into Luna's patient, hopeful face, Richard knew that his answer would change both of their lives forever. The question was he brave enough to let that happen? Richard stood in the center of the ballroom feeling like the whole world was watching him, which in a way it was. Every person in that room had heard his cruel joke and witnessed Luna's incredible performance. Now they waited to see if he was a man of honor or just another rich person who made promises he never intended to keep. His first instinct was to find a way out. His sharp business mind immediately started looking for loopholes. He could claim he was obviously joking. He could write a big check to the charity and hope everyone forgot about his specific words. He could even leave the event right now and let his lawyers handle any social fallout later. But as Richard looked around the room, he realized that escape wasn't really an option. These weren't just random people. They were his business partners, his social circle, his professional network. Many of them had their phones out, and he was sure videos of Luna's performance and his promise were already spreading online. In today's connected world, there was no hiding from your words. More importantly, Luna was still looking at him with those calm, intelligent eyes. She wasn't begging or pleading. She was simply waiting to see what kind of person he really was. That look was more powerful than any business pressure he had ever faced. "Well, Richard?" called out David Chen, a fellow tech billionaire who had been watching the whole scene. "Are you going to keep your word?" That was quite a performance the young lady gave us. Richard felt his face getting hot. David was known for his charitable work and had probably never made a thoughtless promise like this in his life. The question sounded friendly on the surface, but Richard could hear the challenge underneath. David was giving him a chance to do the right thing, but also making it clear that backing down would be noticed and remembered. "Yes, Richard," added another voice from the crowd. "We all heard what you said. If she could really play piano, you would adopt her." "Well, I think we can all agree that she can really play piano." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. People were trying to keep the mood light, but Richard could feel the tension building. This wasn't just about keeping a promise anymore. It was about his reputation, his character, and his standing in the community. Richard's hands started to sweat as he realized the full scope of what was happening. Adoption wasn't like buying a car or making a business deal. It meant taking responsibility for another person's entire life. It meant becoming a father to a child he had met just minutes ago. It meant changing everything about his carefully controlled, selfish existence. His mind raced through all the practical problems. He lived alone in a massive penthouse apartment that wasn't set up for children. He worked 16-hour days and traveled constantly for business. He knew nothing about raising kids, especially not a kid who had been through trauma. What did children eat? How did bedtimes work? What about school and friends and all the millions of things parents were supposed to know? But even as these practical concerns flooded his mind, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Luna's performance. The way she had played wasn't just technically perfect. It was emotionally honest and incredibly brave. She had taken his mockery and responded with something beautiful instead of anger or sadness. That took a kind of strength that Richard wasn't sure he possessed. Richard started to speak, then stopped. His usual confidence had completely abandoned him. For the first time in decades, he didn't have a plan or a strategy. He was just a man standing in a room full of people, trying to figure out how to do the right thing. Luna stood up from her chair and walked toward him again. This time she didn't go to the piano. She stopped directly in front of Richard and looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. "You don't have to adopt me if you don't want to," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I know you were just making a joke, but I wanted you to know that I really can play piano, and I practice every day because it makes me feel close to my mom. Music isn't just something I do, it's who I am." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. This child was giving him an easy way out, showing him more grace and maturity than he had shown her. She was protecting his feelings even though he had tried to embarrass her in front of hundreds of people. How was it possible for someone so young to be so wise and kind? "I don't need a family to be happy," Luna continued, though Richard could see the slight tremor in her hands that suggested this wasn't entirely true. "Mrs. Rodriguez and all the kids at the shelter are like family to me. But if you really meant what you said, I promise I would try to be a good daughter. I would practice piano every day and I would work hard in school and I wouldn't cause any trouble." The ballroom was so quiet that Richard could hear his own heartbeat. Luna's words were simple and honest, without any manipulation or demands. She was a child who had learned not to expect too much from adults, which made Richard feel even worse about his behavior. He looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who was watching with tears in her eyes. He could see the hope she was trying to hide, the way she was praying that this impossible moment might actually lead to something good for Luna. All the other children from the shelter were watching too, their young faces full of wonder at the possibility that their friend might get the kind of chance they all dreamed about. Richard thought about his own childhood, growing up poor with parents who worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. He remembered what it felt like to want things that seemed impossible, to dream about a different kind of life. He had been lucky and smart and ruthless enough to build his fortune, but he had forgotten what it felt like to need someone else's kindness. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting to see what he would choose. But more than that, Luna was waiting, and her trust was somehow more important than all the business relationships and social standing in the world. Richard realized that this wasn't just about keeping a promise or avoiding embarrassment. This was about the kind of person he wanted to be. Did he want to be someone who mocked children and broke his word? Or did he want to be someone who could rise to meet an extraordinary moment with extraordinary courage? As he looked into Luna's patient, hopeful face, Richard knew that his answer would change both of their lives forever. The question was he brave enough to let that happen? Richard took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I keep my promises. If you'll have me as your father, Luna, then I'll be honored to be your family." The ballroom erupted in applause again, but this time it sounded different to Richard's ears. It wasn't just polite charity event clapping. It was genuine celebration. People were crying and hugging each other like they had just witnessed something miraculous. Maybe they had. But making the promise was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Richard discovered that adopting a child involved more paperwork than buying a company. There were background checks, home visits, interviews, and endless forms to fill out. His expensive lawyers worked overtime to navigate the legal process. But even money couldn't speed up everything. During this waiting period, Richard was allowed supervised visits with Luna at the children's shelter. The first visit was awkward beyond anything he had ever experienced. He sat in a small, cheerful room with cartoon characters painted on the walls, trying to make conversation with a 10-year-old girl while a social worker watched and took notes. "So, do you like school?" Richard asked, immediately feeling stupid. Of course she liked school. She was clearly intelligent. "Yes, sir," Luna replied politely. "My favorite subject is music class, but I also like math. Numbers make sense, kind of like music does." Richard was surprised by this answer. He had always been good with numbers too, but he had never thought about the connection between math and music. "How are they similar?" he asked, genuinely curious. Luna's face lit up, and for the first time she seemed like a normal, excited kid instead of someone being careful with her words. "Well, music is all about patterns and rhythms, and math is about patterns too. Like, if you understand fractions, you can understand how long to hold different notes. And if you know about sequences, you can understand how melodies work." As Luna talked about music and math, Richard found himself relaxing. She was smart and passionate, and when she forgot to be nervous, she was actually fun to talk to. By the end of that first visit, they were drawing mathematical patterns on paper and discussing how they might sound if they were turned into music. The second visit went better. Richard brought Luna some sheet music he had ordered online, pieces by her favorite composers that the shelter's old piano books didn't include. Luna's eyes went wide when she saw them, and she hugged the music books like they were treasure. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've wanted to learn this Beethoven sonata forever, but we could never afford the music." Richard felt a strange warmth in his chest. When was the last time someone had been so genuinely grateful for something that cost him so little? His business associates expected expensive gifts and elaborate gestures, but Luna was thrilled with $20 worth of sheet music. During the third visit, Luna played some of the new pieces for him on the shelter's old, slightly out-of-tune piano. Richard sat and listened, amazed again by her talent. But this time he also noticed other things. The way she closed her eyes when she played difficult passages, the little smile that crossed her face when she hit a particularly beautiful note, the way her whole body moved with the music. "My mom used to say that playing piano was like having a conversation with the composer," Luna told him after finishing a Mozart piece. "Like Mozart was talking to me from hundreds of years ago, telling me about what he was feeling when he wrote this." Richard had never thought about music that way. To him, classical music had always been just background noise at fancy events. But watching Luna play, he was beginning to understand that it was something much deeper, a way of communicating emotions that couldn't be expressed in words. As the weeks passed, Richard found himself looking forward to these visits more than any business meeting. Luna was teaching him things without even trying. She showed him how to listen to music differently, how to notice the way rain sounded on windows, how to find beauty in small things he had always ignored. But it wasn't all easy. Richard quickly realized that Luna was used to taking care of herself and not asking for help. She had learned not to expect too much from adults, which meant she often said she was fine when she clearly wasn't. Getting her to open up about her feelings was harder than any business negotiation he had ever handled. One day, Richard arrived for his visit to find Luna sitting quietly by herself, while the other kids played loudly in the next room. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled him aside and explained that it was the anniversary of her mother's death, and Luna always had a hard time on this day. Should I leave her alone? Richard asked, feeling helpless. He knew how to handle million-dollar crises, but he had no idea how to comfort a grieving child. Just be with her, Mrs. Rodriguez advised. Sometimes that's all anyone needs. Richard sat down next to Luna on the small couch. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Luna leaned against his shoulder just slightly and whispered, "I miss her every day. Sometimes I'm scared I'll forget what her voice sounded like." Richard felt his throat tighten. He put his arm around Luna's small shoulders and said, "Tell me about her. What was she like?" For the next hour, Luna told him stories about her mother. How Isabella would make pancakes shaped like musical notes on Sunday mornings. How she would sing lullabies in both English and Chinese. How she would take Luna to free outdoor concerts in the park, and they would dance on the grass until the stars came out. As Luna talked, Richard realized that he was learning not just about Isabella, but about the kind of parent he wanted to become. Isabella had clearly loved her daughter completely, making her feel safe and valued and special. Could Richard learn to do the same? The adoption process moved slowly, but Richard found that he didn't mind the wait anymore. Each visit taught him something new about Luna and about himself. He was beginning to understand that being a parent wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to learn and grow alongside another person. One afternoon, Luna asked him a question that caught him completely off guard. "Mr. Richard, why did you really decide to adopt me? Was it just because of your promise, or is there another reason?" Richard thought carefully before answering. A few weeks ago, he would have said it was just about keeping his word and avoiding embarrassment. But now he realized the truth was more complicated. At first, it was about the promise, he admitted. But now I think maybe I needed you as much as you needed me. You're teaching me things I didn't even know I needed to learn. Luna smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't a polite, careful smile. It was the real smile of a child who was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found a home after all. 3 months after that life-changing charity gala, Luna finally moved into Richard's penthouse apartment. The adoption papers were signed, and legally they were now father and daughter. But Richard quickly learned that family relationships couldn't be created with paperwork and lawyers. They had to be built one day at a time. The first challenge was making Luna feel at home in a space that was designed for a wealthy bachelor, not a 10-year-old girl. Richard's apartment was all black marble, gray leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city skyline. It was impressive and expensive, but it felt cold and unwelcoming to a child who was used to the warm chaos of the children's shelter. "It's very beautiful," Luna said politely on her first day, standing in the enormous living room with her small suitcase in hand. But Richard could see that she felt lost in all that empty space. "We can change anything you want," Richard said quickly. "Paint the walls, buy different furniture, whatever you need to feel comfortable here." Luna's face brightened a little. "Could we maybe get a piano?" she asked shyly. "I know they're expensive, but I could save up my allowance." Richard almost laughed. Here he was, a billionaire, and she was worried about saving up allowance money for a piano. "Luna, I think we can manage a piano without breaking the bank," he said gently. "In fact, let's go shopping for one tomorrow." The next day, they visited the finest piano showroom in the city. Luna moved between the instruments like she was greeting old friends, testing the touch and tone of each one. When she played a few notes on a beautiful Steinway grand piano, her whole face lit up with joy. "This one sounds like singing," she whispered to Richard. "It's like my mom's favorite piano at the music school where she used to teach." Richard didn't even ask the price. "We'll take it," he told the salesman, who looked shocked that someone would make such a quick decision about a $100,000 instrument. When the piano was delivered to the apartment, something magical happened. The cold, empty space suddenly felt like a home. Luna would play every morning before school and every evening after homework, filling the apartment with music that made even Richard smile. But adjusting to their new life together wasn't always easy. Richard had to learn how to be responsible for someone other than himself, and Luna had to learn how to trust that this new arrangement would last. Both of them were scared of making mistakes that might ruin everything. Richard's first parenting crisis came when Luna got sick with the flu. He panicked when her fever spiked, rushing her to the emergency room at 3 in the morning. The doctor smiled kindly and explained that children get fevers, and it wasn't usually dangerous. Richard felt foolish but relieved, and Luna was touched that he had been so worried about her. "My mom used to make me special soup when I was sick," Luna mentioned on the way home from the hospital. "It had ginger and rice, and she would hum while she stirred it." Richard made a mental note to learn how to cook. The next day, he surprised Luna by attempting to make ginger rice soup, even though he had never cooked anything more complicated than coffee before. The soup was terrible, too salty and somehow both mushy and crunchy at the same time. But Luna ate it anyway and declared it almost as good as Mom's. Meanwhile, Richard was discovering that Luna was teaching him as much as he was teaching her. She had a way of noticing beautiful things that he had been too busy to see. She would point out how the morning light looked different through their windows each day, or how the trees in the park were slowly changing colors as autumn arrived. "You work too much," Luna told him one evening when he was answering emails during dinner. "My mom always said that life happens while you're not paying attention, so you have to remember to look up from your work sometimes." Richard closed his laptop and really looked at Luna for the first time that day. She was right. He had been so focused on maintaining his business empire that he was missing the chance to build a relationship with his daughter. From that day forward, Richard made a rule: no work emails during dinner, and no business calls after Luna's bedtime. At first, his assistants thought he was having some kind of breakdown. Richard Blackwood always answered his phone, always responded to emails immediately. But Luna was teaching him that some things were more important than business. As the weeks passed, they developed their own little traditions. Saturday mornings became piano lesson time, where Luna would teach Richard simple pieces and he would struggle through them with fingers that were better suited to typing than playing music. Sunday afternoons were for exploring the city together, visiting museums, walking through parks, or trying new restaurants. Luna was also getting the professional music education she deserved. Richard had hired Mrs. Chen, one of the most respected piano teachers in the city, to work with Luna twice a week. Mrs. Chen was amazed by Luna's natural talent and the progress she had already made through self-teaching. "This child is extraordinary," Mrs. Chen told Richard after Luna's first lesson. "With proper training, she could be performing professionally within a few years. But more importantly, she has something that can't be taught. She truly understands music in her heart." Richard felt proud hearing this, but he also felt something he hadn't expected: protectiveness. He wanted Luna to have every opportunity to develop her gift, but he also wanted her to have a normal childhood. Finding the right balance would be an ongoing challenge. One evening, Luna was practicing a particularly difficult piece when she suddenly stopped playing and started crying. Richard rushed over, worried that she had hurt herself. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside the piano bench. "I can't get this part right," Luna sobbed. "I've been trying for hours and it still doesn't sound the way it's supposed to. Mom would have known how to help me, but she's not here, and I don't know what to do." Richard felt his heart break for this little girl who was trying so hard to honor her mother's memory through music. He didn't know anything about piano technique, but he knew about frustration and feeling alone. "Your mom isn't here to help with the music," Richard said gently, "but I am here to help with everything else. Maybe we can figure this out together, even if we have to do it differently than she would have." They spent the next hour working through the difficult passage together. Richard couldn't help with the musical aspects, but he could encourage Luna to take breaks when she got frustrated, remind her to breathe when she got tense, and celebrate with her when she finally mastered the tricky section. "We make a good team," Luna said with a tired but happy smile as they finally finished practicing. "Yes, we do," Richard agreed, realizing that this was the first time either of them had used the word "we" to describe their relationship. They were becoming a family, slowly but surely, one small moment at a time. That night, as Richard tucked Luna into bed in her new room that they had decorated with music-themed artwork and photos of her mother, she asked him a question that showed how much their relationship had grown. "Dad," she said, using the title for the first time, "do you think Mom would like you?" Richard thought about Isabella Chen, the talented pianist who had given up her career to raise her daughter with love and care. "I hope so," he said honestly. "I'm still learning how to be a good father, but I promise I'll keep trying to be the kind of person she would want taking care of you." "I think she would like you," Luna said sleepily. "You're different from how you were at the charity party. You're kinder now, more like a real person instead of just a rich man." As Richard turned off the light and quietly left Luna's room, he realized that she was absolutely right. Taking care of her had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He was becoming not just a father but a better human being, one day at a time. 1 year after that fateful charity gala, Richard sat in the front row of Carnegie Hall, his hands trembling slightly as he watched Luna prepare for her debut performance. The journey from that night of cruel mockery to this moment of incredible pride felt like a lifetime, even though it had only been 12 months. The concert hall was packed with people who had come to hear about this young prodigy who had captured the classical music world's attention. Music critics, fellow musicians, and classical music lovers filled every seat, but Richard barely noticed the crowd. His eyes were focused entirely on his daughter. Luna looked beautiful and confident in her deep blue concert dress, a color that brought out the serious intelligence in her dark eyes. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant style that made her look older than her 11 years. But when she smiled and waved at Richard from the stage, she was still completely his little girl. The program for tonight was special. Luna would be performing 3 pieces that told the story of her journey. The first was the same Chopin Minute Waltz that had stunned everyone at the charity event. The second was a Mozart sonata that her mother had loved to play. And the third was something extraordinary, a piece that Luna had composed herself, dedicated to both her mother's memory and her new father. As the concert hall lights dimmed and Luna took her place at the magnificent Steinway grand piano, Richard's mind wandered back over the incredible year they had shared. There had been challenges and adjustments, tears and laughter, moments of frustration and breakthrough. But through it all, they had become a real family. Luna's music education had flourished under Mrs. Chen's expert guidance. She was now studying advanced pieces that challenged even adult musicians, but more importantly, she was developing her own unique musical voice. Mrs. Chen often told Richard that Luna had something special that couldn't be taught, an ability to communicate pure emotion through music. But Richard was proudest of how Luna had grown as a person. Living in a stable, loving home had allowed her natural confidence and joy to bloom. She made friends at her new school, joined the student council, and even started a music appreciation club. She was becoming a well-rounded young person, not just a talented musician. The first notes of the Chopin waltz rang out across the concert hall, and Richard was transported back to that night at the charity gala. But this time, instead of shock and embarrassment, he felt overwhelming pride and love. Luna played with even more skill and emotion than she had that first night, and the audience was completely captivated. As Luna moved through the challenging passages of the waltz, Richard remembered all the hours she had spent practicing in their apartment. He had learned to love the sound of piano music filling their home, especially in the early morning when Luna would play softer pieces while he made breakfast. Those quiet moments together had become some of the most precious parts of his day. The Chopin piece ended to thunderous applause, and Luna smiled graciously before beginning the Mozart sonata. This piece had special meaning for both of them. It was one of Isabella's favorites, and Luna often played it when she missed her mother most. Richard had learned to recognize the look that crossed Luna's face when she played her mother's music, a peaceful expression that suggested she felt connected to Isabella through the melodies. As Luna played the Mozart, Richard thought about how much he had learned about grief and healing over the past year. Luna had taught him that missing someone didn't have to be just about sadness. It could also be about celebrating their memory and carrying their love forward. Through Luna's music, Richard felt like he had gotten to know Isabella Chen, and he was honored to continue raising the daughter she had loved so much. The Mozart sonata concluded with a delicate, beautiful passage that seemed to float through the air like a prayer. The audience sat in respectful silence for a moment before applauding, clearly moved by the depth of emotion in Luna's performance. Now came the moment Richard had been both anticipating and dreading, Luna's original composition. She had worked on this piece for months, pouring her heart into music that told her own story. She called it Finding Home, and it was her gift to Richard and her way of honoring everything they had been through together. Luna adjusted herself at the piano bench and began to play. The piece started with a melody that sounded lost and searching, representing her early life and the tragedy of losing her mother. Richard could hear the sadness and confusion in the music, but also the strength and resilience that had carried Luna through her darkest times. As the composition progressed, new themes entered the music, tentative at first, then growing stronger and more confident. These represented her arrival at the children's shelter, her friendship with Mrs. Rodriguez and the other kids, and the slow process of learning to trust and hope again. Then came the musical representation of that night at the charity gala. The music became dramatic and challenging, with bold, powerful passages that showed Luna facing her fears and proving her worth. Richard could actually hear his own transformation in the music too. Harsh, discordant notes that gradually softened and became harmonious. The final section of Finding Home was the most beautiful music Richard had ever heard. It wove together all the previous themes into something joyful and complete, representing the family they had built together. The melody sang of love that was chosen rather than just given, of healing that happened slowly and carefully, of two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other. As Luna played the final notes of her composition, tears streamed down Richard's face. He wasn't embarrassed by his emotions. Luna had taught him that feeling deeply was something to be proud of, not hidden. Around him, he could see that most of the audience was crying too, moved by the honesty and beauty of Luna's musical story. The concert hall erupted in the longest standing ovation Richard had ever witnessed. People were cheering, crying, and calling out "Bravo" as Luna stood and curtsied gracefully. She looked out at the audience with joy and confidence, no longer the scared little girl from the children's shelter, but a young artist who had found her voice and her place in the world. When Luna's eyes found Richard in the front row, she smiled the biggest, most genuine smile he had ever seen. He stood and applauded harder than anyone, his heart so full of love and pride that he thought it might burst. After the concert, as they stood together backstage surrounded by flowers and congratulations from music industry professionals, Luna hugged Richard tightly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you for keeping your promise and giving me a home." "Thank you for teaching me what home really means," Richard whispered back, holding his daughter close. As they walked out of Carnegie Hall together, Richard reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a wealthy but lonely man who thought success was measured only in money and business achievements. Tonight, he was the proud father of an extraordinary young woman who had taught him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or sold. Luna had not only found her home, she had helped Richard find his heart. And as they stepped out into the New York evening, surrounded by the sounds and lights of the city, they both knew that this was just the beginning of their story together. The cruel joke that had started their relationship had become the foundation of something beautiful and real. Sometimes Richard thought as he watched Luna skip happily beside him, the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes keeping a promise you never meant to make can lead to the greatest gift you've ever received. Their family might have started with mockery and challenge, but it had grown into something filled with love, music, and the kind of happiness that Richard had never known was possible. Luna had taught him that redemption was real, that people could change, and that home wasn't a place. It was the people who loved you exactly as you were, while helping you become the person you were meant to be.